Hi everyone! Today I would like to talk to you about a very special and hot topic right now for 2022, and that's called inflation. So in this video I'd like to explain to you what inflation is, what the government definition is, and also different ways that you can actually look at inflation for yourself. And in the second part of the video I'd like to tell you about some tips to actually find some peace of mind about inflation for this year, but also for the rest of your life. When you hear about inflation in the news, usually people are referring to the simple definition of inflation, which is the rate at which prices are increasing. Sometimes you will hear about CPI or RPI, and those are measures which are usually taken nationally about how a country's inflation is actually increasing. And what it means for you, it basically is that when prices are increasing, if your revenue are not increasing at the same time, then your purchasing power is going down. That means you cannot buy as much goods as you could before. And what drives inflation? Well, in simple terms, it's a combination of the economic growth that you have in a certain country or in the world, and how much money is actually out there in your country or in the world. For instance, over the past few years, there's been a lot of money printing. It means that there is a lot more money out there. Okay, so money has been created by governments and it's been put on the market, whether it's the US Federal Reserve or it's the ECB in Europe. So there's been a lot of creation of money which has gone into the system. Now let's talk about what inflation means for you. For instance, do you know what is the inflation in your country? If you see on this table, this is a rate of inflation that happened in 2021 in major countries around the world. The question you might ask yourself is, what does that mean for me? Can you actually trust those numbers? Well, not really. And one of the key reasons for that is that this definition of inflation has changed a lot in many countries. And the first reason for that is that the way it's calculated is quite complex nowadays compared to what it used to be back before the 80s. And the main reason for this new type of definition for the way inflation is calculated is actually to make it look like it's lower than what it actually is. Well, and why government would actually be doing this? Well, they're a little bit in a bind. They have an increase of price which is higher than that, and then that means that you're experiencing higher inflation, which means that what you should be doing is asking for a raise, or you should be increasing the prices of your goods. And what it's going to create is actually going to create more inflation. So what is the result of that? Well, it's pretty simple, and that's very visible across time. There is an erosion of purchasing power for people who are actually not having a lot of capital saved, where a lot of inflation is going into that. So your assets, like stock market, for instance, is going faster up. Now, the result of all of this is that for people who are living on their paycheck and they don't have a lot of savings, basically the cost of living is increasing, but the revenues are not increasing as fast. The salaries, the paychecks are not increasing as fast. So the number that you see in terms of inflation reported in the news doesn't matter to you, because this number, one, is not entirely real, and the second thing is not what you experience. Inflation at the end of the day is what we experience. It's this difference that is creating in our purchasing power, a reduction of our purchasing power. And when you feel that squeeze, basically, with this increase in price, and at the same time you're not getting this increase in revenue for yourself, that's inflation. Now let's talk about how we actually can get some peace of mind about inflation now and actually for the rest of our lives. And I'm going to call them your peace action, okay? It's your actions to get peace of mind with inflation. So your first peace action is to know what your inflation is. What does that mean? Well, it's only when you know your cost that you truly know your inflation. And I'll tell you about a personal story. So it might sound a little bit crazy, but I started to count all my expenses back in 2006, okay? That means that I've got 16 years of counting everything, all my receipts, everything that I've actually spent in the past 16 years. And the benefit of that is I can actually look at how much I was spending in 2006 and how it's evolved every year up to 2021. And that's a good way of effectively looking at two things. One is how much inflation there's been on a lot of my expenses. And the second aspect to take into account is effectively the change of lifestyle that you might have had over those 16 years for me. So what's the number for me? Well, actually, my cost of living, if we're comparing with comparable exchange rates, I was living in the UK at that time, and now I'm living in Thailand. But if I equalize things, it basically means that nowadays I spend 75% more than I was spending in 2006. So what's 75% over 16 years? Well, actually, if you make the calculation, it's about 3.5% increase per year. And that is not bad, actually, because if you look at the rate of inflation, well, the rate of inflation which has been reporting in the UK over those 16 years was about 2.1%. But if we look at a real rate of inflation, it's probably somewhere double to that. So that would be about 4% compared to my 3.5%. It means that I basically have leveled my expenses over 16 years, or even managed to actually keep them down compared to the evolution of prices. If you're interested to know more about how to count money to support your life goals, then please subscribe to my channel. The next video will be exactly about that. For your second piece action, what's important now that you have counted your money is to be able to see where inflation is applying to the different part of your budget. For example, if you're spending 25% of all your budget on food that you buy in supermarket, how is that evolving if you look at month by month? If you take different receipts and you look at the price of different items and say, has that been increasing? It's very hard to actually understand the price increase of a variety of things if you don't actually look at it once in a while. So keep your receipts, because it will help you to actually compare things from, let's say, 1 month to 6 months later. And the tricky thing about inflation is that it sneaks up on us without us noticing. It's something which is very progressive, and it's only like maybe a year later that you say, well, hold on, I've spent a lot more money than I expected on this. Another example is if you look at your rent. So do you have a good visibility of the inflation that there is on your rent? Usually that's fairly easy. You either sign a contract for 1 year or 3 years for renting, a lease, and then you can see whether you have a guaranteed rate for the 3 years or an increase which is already negotiated with a landlord. So you see the pattern. You're looking at the different categories of expenses that you have, and you're looking at what inflation could be or is on those different expenses. For your third piece action, when you look at all your costs and you see that there are some items which have high potential or actual inflation, look at what you could substitute them with something else. And sometimes we do rush because we see that there is an increase of price, or toilet paper because we have COVID. But going after things which are actually increasing in price is not necessarily the best strategy. You can consider some pretty big changes actually. Sometimes they are long-term ones. So if you're renting and you see that rent cost is actually going up really quickly where you live, then considering buying, particularly if interest rates are very low for a loan, might be a good option. And also smaller things, they add up over time. So for instance, you look at what you buy for food and you're like, well, do you really need to buy that super expensive chocolate bar? Can you actually buy one which is a little bit cheaper but as good as the previous one? Or do you really need this very fluffy toilet paper? Those small savings actually go a really long way when they accumulate over time. For the fourth piece action, make sure that you actually spend money on things which are important for you. It's very easy to be spending money on things which are not really bringing happiness to ourselves or are not actually pushing our life goals forward. And if you have done this effort of actually building a budget and measuring your costs, now is actually a good time to look at those costs and say, okay, are they serving me in terms of being happier? Are they serving me in terms of pursuing my life goals? In my video about peace of mind with money, I have an exercise that allows you to focus on what really makes you happy in life, and also put your effort in terms of cost and budget towards what makes you happy in life. Spend your money on what is a priority for you in your life and cut most of the rest. You now understand your cost, you know where inflation is hurting you the most in some of your cost items, and you know what is important for you in terms of your life goals, where you need to spend your money. So having all of this information is really important for you now to be saying, okay, so I know where my cost of living is going. So if you have to do a negotiation about your salary increase, for instance, that gives you a lot of data that you can come back to your employer about. Most employers come back to employees every year and tell them that they will have an increase of salary which will be linked to inflation, and usually they use a CPI. The consumer price index, as we discussed, is something which is not representing your inflation, And your inflation, as long as it's not about your lifestyle, is something that you can demonstrate to your employer. And if you're self-employed and you're setting up your own prices for the products that you sell, well, having all this information tells you about, okay, am I increasing my lifestyle, or is there really something going on around me, which is inflation, that I also can translate into my prices? And when you're looking for a job, you can actually look for companies which have a progressive policy with regards to salary increase and how they look at inflation. If you find this video useful, please smash the like button, and if you would like to see more content like this, please subscribe to my channel. In this video, I hope that you learn more about what inflation is, and particularly what inflation is for you, and how you can actually do some simple actions that will bring you some peace of mind about inflation, about right now, and also for the rest of your life. And remember, be the special agents of your life. Take control of what you can with regards to money and your life goals, so you can find peace of mind. For more peace of mind with money tips, please make sure that you stay tuned, as the next video will give you more tips about finding peace of mind.